Welcome to the Gamut of Performance Podcast, episode 20. On this episode of the podcast, I get to talk with Coach Damien Fisher. This is another really special episode because Damien and I used to work at Western Washington University together. Damien had just begun starting the strength and conditioning department at Western Washington, and he started as a graduate assistant, and I was his student assistant. So we didn't have any kind of strength and conditioning department like these big schools do now. So we were bare bones. It was just me and him running everything. To be honest, it was mostly him, but I was allowed to help, and so I did everything in my power to be in the weight room as much as possible. I had a really unique opportunity where Damien allowed me to get a lot of hands-on experience, a lot of coaching on the fly. He gave me a lot of groups, a lot of individuals, and so there was no time for me to really be scared or anything like that. I was thrown into the fire early, which I can't thank him enough for, because it was one of the experiences that really helped shape me into who I am now as a coach. And it also helps me when I'm working with my current interns and how I approach things with them. Damien is hands down one of the smartest people I have ever worked for. And so without further ado, here is Coach Damien Fisher. Coach Fisher, thanks for being on with us today. I really appreciate your time. Really excited to kind of pick your brain. You know, it's been a while since we worked together. For the listeners at home, Damien and I worked together. I worked for him at Western Washington University. I was a student assistant while he started the strength and conditioning program. So, Damien, for the listeners, what's that?
So way back at this
Way
point.
back, yeah. So for the listeners at home, will you tell us a little bit about your background, your motivation, and kind of how you got to where you are?
Yeah, of course. Again, thanks for having me. It's cool to see you kind of growing in your, in this field and moving up the chain. So
Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I was a student athlete at Western Washington University, so Division II out in Washington State. I did both basketball and track and field. Coaching was something that interested me for a long time, primarily because I like to educate. That's what I do. I tell a lot of people that if I didn't go into coaching, I'd probably be teaching, either at the high school or professor type deal. Just because I feel very strongly that passing along information and correct information is essential for progression of any field. I think we get stagnation, when we don't have an effective communication of past successes, more or less. So that's what got me into coaching, was that desire to teach. I love sports. I love what they can do on a individual level. So it gets people out of situations that they may not have had a route out of. And that's one of the cool things about sports, is they are an art form that allows people to express themselves in an athletic way. So coaching was kind of a natural fit for me. I fell into strength coaching largely because when I first came into high school sports, I was incredibly small. I was
Hard to believe now.
6 foot. Yeah, I was 6'6" at 14 years old, and weighed maybe 170 pounds, and couldn't dunk the ball.
Okay.
So every day in practice, that sophomore year, I played JV, and I got tossed around by a kid who was on our high school team, who ended up playing football in college. And I got sick of it.
Yeah.
Didn't want to do that anymore. So I spent summer in the weight room, put on like 35 pounds maybe that summer.
Yeah.
Since I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
And saw what kind of a change that could do over even that short period of time. And it allows me to work with people from all sorts of diverse backgrounds and teams. That's the really cool thing about it, is as strength coaches, we don't see one population. We get to see a lot. So we get to practice various methods of communication and education across very different groups of people.
I agree. No, that's awesome. That's really cool to hear. So there's hope for those skinny people, right?
Absolutely.
So how have you drawn upon your experiences as an athlete, right? Both past and, for those who don't know, so you currently are still an athlete in a different realm, so I kind of let you expand on that. But how do you draw upon your experiences to help drive decision-making with some of your teams?
Yeah, I think the big thing with that is, as coaches, we often will come across a new training method or identify some kind of a weakness that we feel needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And if we haven't experienced it in some way,
Mm-hmm.
it's often hard to lose feel of how that will affect the athletes.
Yeah.
So we can come across a research study that has a lactic endurance protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've never done anything close to that, if you've never been an athlete and had to balance school and, Division II level, many athletes balance part-time work because scholarships aren't truly full, especially for sports like track and field and rowing.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to lose touch of, this will trash my kids.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is improve performance, and sometimes that means we have to hold the volume back, or hold the intensity back, because we have to understand what are the practice demands.
Yeah.
If I've never played basketball, if I've never been around a basketball setting, it's easy to say, well, I have this kid who's this week, he front squats 135, we're going to do it 3 times a week, squatting program and fix this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's also got to run in practice for 2 hours a day.
Yeah.
Conditioning, playing, and if he's trying to fight for a spot, how do we balance that loading in the physical preparation side of things with what they have to do in their sport?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the biggest part where having been an athlete has been very useful.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I was fortunate enough to again do track and field and basketball, so I both got to see the team sport and the individual sport side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Which has given me a pretty good insight, especially when I was starting out,
Yeah.
to the different mentalities that athletes in these sports tend to have.
Mm-hmm.
Because often kids in individual sports won't make it in a team sport, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Just because they have different mentalities, different reasons for competing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having that insight has allowed me to learn how to communicate across all of the teams that we have very quickly, because I've seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
Currently as a Highland Games thrower, it allows me to keep testing things out.
Yeah.
It lets me to keep that competitive mindset more or less,
Mm-hmm.
And to stay in touch with that, because it's a very different mindset between when you're just training to stay in shape, working out,
Yeah.
versus just training.
Mm-hmm.
So it keeps that fresh in my mind that what is training, what are we doing to try to actually progress in our sport, as opposed to lifting to see a big squat or trying to stay fit or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Will you expand a little bit on your experiences as a Highland Games thrower?
Yeah. So I joke that I became an athlete at 23 years old, which unfortunately was after I finished up in college.
Yeah.
I kind of stumbled into it. So
Okay.
I finished up track, and my wife loves bagpipes. Like, we'll be brought to tears
Okay.
to win bagpipes.
All right.
So she said we should go to the Highland Festival that was in town.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew nothing about it. I knew there was bagpipes, and that was it.
Okay.
I'd heard of the Highland Games like in Scotland,
Yeah.
but had no idea they were really a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Went there with a buddy of mine as well who also threw on the team, and we saw the throwing, like we could do that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So we entered for the next year. He ended up getting hurt, so it was just me.
Okay.
Did pretty well. So okay, this could be a hobby.
Yeah.
Found out that you can get paid if you throw far enough.
Yeah.
Okay, I can try that.
Yeah.
Was fortunate enough to pick it up pretty fast. So this is my 3rd year professionally right now.
Okay.
And it's a really cool. I hesitate to call it a sport,
Yeah.
only
Okay.
because it's so niche.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where everybody who's good at it was usually good at something else.
Okay.
But there are so few people overall who do it.
Mm-hmm.
That I liken it to a mix between strongman and track and field.
Yeah.
So it's more or less track and field throwing with heavier implements.
Okay.
So you tend to get people who either have a strong track and field background,
Mm-hmm.
or have a strongman or a strength type background,
Mm-hmm.
who are a little bit more athletic. We've had a couple guys in the professional class who played in the NFL,
Mm-hmm.
And didn't have much of a throwing background, but were strong enough and good enough athletes that they could pick this stuff up.
Interesting. Okay.
But pretty much I spend the summer flying around, get paid to throw pieces of metal and rocks and having a great time.
Yeah.
So it's the best hobby you could possibly have. 'Cause
Yeah.
it lets me stay competitive.
Uh-huh.
But because it's really only held in the summers, it fits nicely with the academic schedule.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Okay. So moving forward a little bit, right? Will you talk about your experience kind of starting the strength and conditioning program at Western Washington? For example, how has the strength program kind of affected the athletics as a whole?
Yeah, so when I came in, it was 2014, I believe, was when I finished up undergrad.
Okay.
I started volunteering a little bit with the basketball teams because I knew those coaches from playing basketball.
Yeah.
Didn't screw up too much, so I ended up being offered a graduate position to work with more or less whoever wanted me to.
Okay.
So at that point, I think the first year I might have had 4 teams, the second year maybe 6, and I've slowly kind of grown.
Yeah.
Was brought on staff after that, and have been doing that ever since. So what I've seen is it took a little bit for it to catch on.
Yeah.
Some of the teams, especially, there was not necessarily hesitation, more or less they didn't feel that it was important. You know, they did some kind of conditioning on their own. We've had a history of pretty successful teams, so they felt it was just kind of unnecessary.
Yeah.
You know, why would we need to do this kind of stuff? What we've seen is a shift in attitudes with teams. So now it's by and large seen as an expectation.
Yeah.
You know, we be training, we will be doing this stuff, we will improve our strength and power and all that. The other thing is we've seen, and it's only been a few years, so it's hard to have a trend. You know, we've seen a decrease in the short term in sprains and strains.
Okay.
As well as large, ligament type injuries. Knock on wood.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah.
Again, it's hard because it's only been 4 years, and it's really only been 2 years that the entire department has been on board. So it's hard to really call it a trend because it's a pretty small sample size.
Yeah.
You know, but what we're seeing is very positive. We've seen really strong performances across the board from our teams.
Okay.
You know, we were 2 years ago, I think we were 11th in the year-end Division II rankings. We had 13 of 15 teams go to NCAAs. We had 2 team national champions and 1 individual national champion that year. This past year we had another national runner-up. We had, I think, 10 teams go to NCAAs. We've had something like 22 or 24 All-Americans in the past 2 years. So I think it's definitely shown an impact as far as developing a well-rounded athletic department. You know, again, it's hard to, as we all know, it's very hard to narrow down any success to what a strength and conditioning coach is doing.
Yeah.
But it seems like at this point that we are seeing a positive effect kind of across the board, and there's definitely been a shift in attitude.
Yeah.
Which is cool to see because now when incoming players come in, the current players have already set the tone.
Yeah.
You know, the way I put it is if you have those couple players who will, I call it to quietly set expectations. It's just there's a standard.
Yeah.
You know, if you come in and you're a female basketball player and the lower front squats on the team are say 155, and you come in as a freshman, that's just what you expect.
Yeah.
You know, if you come in kind of all across the board, which you can't always control, depending on recruiting. But if you come in and you got some low, some high, you don't really have a standard.
Yeah.
Just because they look and they see all sorts of variation. So I think that's been something we've seen, especially on a team like volleyball.
Yeah.
When I first started working with them, they've always been very well coached and technically very proficient. But the physical preparation, as far as strength type stuff goes, was a little bit on the lower end. So it's been really cool to see a shift over these past 3 years with them towards when a freshman comes in, it's like, oh yeah, front squat 185 that's just kind of what people do.
Yeah.
That's no longer a big number.
Yeah.
And that's when you start to see that kind of culture shift, which I'm excited to see over the next couple of years, for that to continue to grow.
Yeah.
That we just have these base expectations. We don't have to get on people about it. It's just that's what you do.
Yeah. No, I like that. So what kind of limitations have you experienced working at a Division II school?
Yeah, I mean, the big one, I'm sure, is many places, including most Division Ones, is just the budget.
Yeah.
I mean, my yearly room budget is staggeringly low.
Okay.
If I have to replace one of my reverse diapers,
Yeah.
that's more than half of my yearly budget.
Oh my God. Okay.
So the biggest thing with that is it leaves any kind of nutrition resources completely off the table.
Yeah.
They're just not an option. Because even to provide, say, one post-workout shake, or even the powder, you know, is 1/4 is probably going to take half of that budget. So we have to do nutrition education, but we cannot help providing any of that just because we don't have the resources.
Yeah. Okay.
The other big one is just facility sharing of space. You know, our weight room, which I was fortunate enough to be able to design and get to choose what we have, but I still have to share it with PE classes.
Yeah.
So they get first bid between 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. every day of the week.
That's tough.
So it's not so bad as far as scheduling team sessions.
Yeah.
Because for the most part, that's when athletes will take their classes.
Yeah, they got classes.
Right, but when people have conflicts and they need to make up sessions, it's very limited because typically they'll practice in the afternoon.
Exactly.
So if they cannot make, say, the 1 o'clock lift time, but they have a 3 o'clock practice, they're going to have to come in at 6 a.m. while one of the other teams is in.
Yeah.
Because there simply isn't an availability in the room in many cases. As well as we have to share, our gymnasiums with PE classes, same deal in the morning.
Yeah.
So if we want to do even our turf field, that's outside. So if we want to do any kind of sprinting, hopping over distance, skips, med ball throws, anything that requires more than the small room that we have, we have to work around the PE class schedule.
Yeah.
That type of thing that, you make it work, but it definitely can become a challenge.
Yeah.
I think one of the other ones is simply I wouldn't necessarily call it a challenge, but more of a variable or a consideration, is that the level of athletes, the type of athlete and the abilities often have a really wide discrepancy between the best and the lower end of the teams.
Okay.
Just because typically you're going to get your players who probably could sneak on a Division I level, and those are going to be your top end players. And then you're going to get your kids that are local walk-ons.
Yeah.
Who sometimes will have a decent skill level in their sport, and they simply don't have the athletic ability.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things when addressing training for teams, there'll often have to be some substantial changes, because we'll have a very wide range of what people can do. And everybody can improve, but we all have our limits. And we see some pretty big discrepancies, especially on the larger teams like track and field. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Okay, conversely, so what are some advantages that you might have at a Division II school?
The big one is I think it gives you an opportunity to influence kids in more than just sports. And it goes back to that education side of it.
Yeah.
My passion is educating. I want to see people grow as people by the time they leave here.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I approach coaching. And I think Division II gives you a little bit more opportunity to do that, because the focus isn't as much on athletic success.
Okay.
I mean, it is. We want to be successful, we want to win, and we have been, but it's much more of a balance. As far as the mentality of the athletes that we get is often much more of a balance of academics and athletics.
Okay.
Most of them, maybe men's basketball excluded, recognize that they're probably not going professional.
Yeah.
And some of them still do, but in most cases they come in knowing that I want to do the best that I can in this sport, but this isn't my life.
Yeah.
And so it definitely gives more of an opportunity to influence people, as opposed to just athletic development.
No, I think that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing would just be at this level tends to be more of a relative stability for staff.
Okay.
Because that emphasis isn't so much on are we winning and losing now. There tends to not be so much turnover.
Yeah.
Which is something I have a wife and 2 kids. That's something that's a draw to me.
Yeah.
That I don't want to be moving around the country every 2 or 3 years. Depending on what basketball coach, how successful they are, or something like that. So that kind of stability is a very big draw for me.
Okay. So moving forward into the training piece, right? So this is kind of the big piece for you that you've really helped adapt and to grow. So let's talk training for throwers, right? So how has the development of the throwers progressed over time?
The primary thing for me has been shifting from the thought of throwers as lifters to athletes.
Yeah.
Because I think it's something that, especially at this level, we tend to not get these behemoth kids who squat 700 pounds out of high school.
Yeah.
And it becomes, how can we set development markers that will actually have an effect on their performance, as opposed to how much weight can we toss around in the room.
Yeah.
So something I've done is really trying to refine what are our, again, development targets. How do we determine what is going to help somebody progress? And a lot of that is as much as we can individualizing those targets. And what I mean by that is we may have a kid who comes in and does squat 500 pounds out of high school, but he has a vertical of 24 inches. Okay. There's obviously a weak point here.
Yeah.
And it's probably not his absolute strength. Especially if he only weighs, 250. He's got the double body weight covered. So what can we do to address that weakness? Because chances are, if he's that strong, he's plenty strong enough to throw the shot, 55 feet.
Yeah.
The issue is, can he apply that force in a fast enough time? So then we can target the training towards how do we improve that ability to express force quickly, as opposed to how can we just express more force in most cases. The way I kind of approach that is, we talked a little bit about this the other week, is kind of the old Charlie Francis thing of do everything all of the time in varying amounts. So the big methods that I use are typically jumping and sprinting, med ball throws, Olympic lifts, static lifts, the big squat and bench. Typically we don't deadlift a whole lot, and then accessories to develop weak points or build hypertrophy or whatever we need. So we'll use all 5 of those all of the time, and we'll just change depending on the time of year, depending on who the kid is, and what their needs are on how we apply those. And we've seen a lot of success, especially with the kids that we've had coming in, a lot of improvement using this kind of model, because it's very easy to adapt to the person. If I have all 5 of these things in place, I can very easily say, we're still going to sprint all of you today, but some of you are doing some more reps, some of you doing less. If we're doing med ball throws, same deal. Some of you may be doing more of a work capacity focus, some of you may be doing regular throws, and we can very easily shift it, but not ruin our flow through the training session, as well as not taking up a ton of space, which is always a big consideration for us.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay. So will you dive into the structure for the throwers a little bit more?
Yeah. Roughly how I approach it is, fall is general preparation.
Okay.
So we approach it as, this is where we set our physical base as well as our technical base. I know it doesn't really fit with standard, GPP type stuff, but we tend to break things down as far as technical movements go, and we tend to do a lot more volume in the weight room. Again, depending on where somebody's individual need is, so that volume could be relative to what they've done before.
Okay.
But fall is, again, setting that foundation. Winter, approach it as improving the ability to, or the potential to express. What I mean by that is, that's typically when we'll focus on maximal strength, that kind of stuff. When we get to spring is expressing those skills.
Okay.
We do have indoor season, but it's kind of secondary for us. So we tend to focus on the outdoor a bit more. We've been strong at discus and hammer especially, so that's kind of aided in that. But the way that might look is, in the fall, we'll probably lift 4 times a week. Okay. So that would be two upper body focus days, 2 lower body focus days. We'll often have 2 days of general conditioning or general strength type stuff. I'll use a high-low model. So how that would look is, say Monday would be a high day, which will tend to be our lower body day. That would include any kind of a jumping or sprinting as well. Tuesday would be a medium day, so that would be our upper body lifting. That would include any type of explosive med ball throws that we're doing.
Okay.
Wednesday would be our endocrine or general strength or restoration, however you want to term that day. Bouchak Snyder has put out some stuff about that.
Yeah.
I think Dan Path as well, about using some of the, the Waterloo circuits, multi-throw circuits, that kind of a thing, where you're doing usually 20 to 30 seconds, a total of, maybe 12 to 16 exercises for 2 to 4 rounds. And what you're trying to do is stimulate a endocrine response by causing a mild lactate accumulation.
Okay.
And what we found is that early in the season, so right when we show up, kind of the first month type thing, especially throwers will get trashed by those.
Yeah.
Because they come in really out of shape.
Yeah.
And as soon as they get into shape, then it has a restorative effect, and they'll actually look forward to it. And they'll go, oh, great, we have, Waterloo today. I know I'm going to feel better tomorrow.
Yeah.
Going through this stuff. What it also does is allows us to, in the fall, set an enormous foundation of movement. And what I mean by that is we have an incredible variety of exercises that we use. Every 3 to 4 weeks, I'll typically rotate, usually every 4 weeks, I'll typically rotate just about every exercise they perform.
Okay.
Because what I'm looking for is improvement in movement patterns as opposed to improvement in a specific lift.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, again, we talked about this before, that I don't really care if it's their back squat going up. I care that their ability to express force in a squatting motion increases. Because when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter what type of squat you perform. What matters is you're strengthening the body in a way that will apply to their given task, in this case, throwing. So we'll often rotate through pretty much every type of lift, usually just a variation. So say if we're doing Olympic lifts, the first block might be no foot power cleans. The second might be, so that would be focusing on really feeling that turnover to get underneath the bar. The second one might be full cleans from blocks. The third one might be power cleans from the floor. And we'll use a progression that makes sense, but really what we're doing is applying a stimulus in a slightly different manner. So we're having to learn how to apply force in various positions.
Okay.
And my view on that is just that when we're throwing, we're asking them to get into some really often extreme positions. We want to put the hips in a place where we can create separation between the shoulder and the hip to have the longest type of a pull. And so the more positions that we can develop strength through, the greater chance that they will be able to express that in the throw, is what I've found.
Okay.
So it lets us set this enormous base in the fall, so their bodies know how to do everything, more or less. And if we find something that's particularly challenging, I'll often keep it in for another block for somebody, because I want them, one, to have the mental side of, I have not necessarily mastered, but I've been successful developing a movement.
Okay.
And the other part is just so that they have time to adapt to that movement. Sometimes we'll look at, say, if we're doing a single leg RDLs, pretty standard lift, somebody cannot keep their back flat. They always pop that outside hip up. Okay. We may need to break things down a little bit more and assign some specific glute med exercises, clamshells, that kind of thing, to try to fix that so that they can perform these correctly.
Yeah.
So often if they are unable to perform it, we'll keep it a little bit longer and include other supplemental stuff. And that's the other side of it, is in addition to exposing them to a huge movement library, both through the lifting and through the general strength multi-throws, it allows me to see where weaknesses might be. Because I don't have a lot of faith in movement screens in most cases.
Okay.
Simply because a movement screen is there may be a reason why, say FMS type stuff, but it doesn't have any specific relation to their sport.
Yeah.
And there's been research that's come out that says, like, the FMS cannot predict injury.
Yeah.
Well, if it can't predict injury, what are we performing this for? movements as a movement screen, more or less. If you cannot perform this movement, okay, why? Can we get to the root of how we fix that? And it's allowed me to, across the board with all of our teams, have a pretty efficient way of addressing movement issues, just because we use such a wide variety of assistance exercises.
Okay.
As we move from the fall towards the winter, as in a standard kind of GPP to FPP progression, we'll reduce a number of exercises that we'll do.
Okay.
So often the primary lifts, the Olympics, and the statics, the squat and bench, will tend to stay the same or more similar for a longer period of time, so we can progress in these specific lifts. Whereas I'll still rotate the accessory movements.
Yeah.
And that's still, we're still building. You know, what I'll do now is tend to target those accessory movements a little bit more directly to the person. So say if somebody has trouble locking out their bench, you know, now we're going to do more tricep type work.
Yeah.
If somebody has issues popping their hips up out of the bottom of front squat, you know, okay, we'll do some more quad or upper back type work depending on what it looked like.
Yeah.
So a little bit more targeted assistant work, and you could view it as now we're focusing on those lifts as opposed to general physical qualities.
Okay.
When we come to spring, we really reduce the movement library because now we're trying to master whatever specific pattern that we're doing and cause an adaptation. What I've found is that the less we change exercises, typically the faster somebody will respond to them.
Okay.
But the faster they will stagnate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we do a back squat for 6 months, we're gonna get pretty good at back squatting, but we're gonna top out.
Yeah.
So rotating this through the year, where in the fall we're rarely doing the same exercise for more than 3 or 4 weeks. In the winter it'll last a little bit longer, and then in the spring we're just doing the same thing. And the focus with that is because we'll tend to drop the intensity, and especially the volume a bit in spring, so they can perform and really increase the technical volume of work that they do.
Yeah.
Because the throwing in the spring will increase to 5-6 times a week, counting meets. Is it lets them be precise with these movements. So if we're doing, say, a speed squat, they now, after the winter, are pretty solid on, say, back squats. So I can be comfortable, and I know that when we're doing, say, a velocity-based back squat, that their movement is pretty proficient, and I know that there's not going to be a whole lot of variance in those numbers. Whereas if we kept rotating through the spring, there's probably going to be a bit of variance because they're not going to be as proficient at that specific movement.
Yeah.
So it really boils down to we're working from an incredibly large exercise library to a very specific one that tends to be individualized to the person. And what I mean by that is kind of going back to if the kid squats 500 pounds but only has a 24-inch vertical.
Yeah.
Chances are he's really slow twitch.
Yeah.
And slow twitch kids, in most cases, need to be much stronger than fast twitch.
Yeah.
The example I'll tend to use, which I've seen listed elsewhere as well, is say if you have 2 kids and they have 200-pound squats, and one of them can apply 50% of that, and one of them can apply 80% of that within whatever sporting action they're performing, that slow twitch kid is going to have to get his squat to 300 pounds to apply the same amount of force in that sporting action time as the fast twitch kid who is still only squatting 200. So if I have somebody who, especially at this level, and even smaller Division I's, you're going to get a lot of slow twitch kids.
Yeah.
Because if you're a beast, you're not coming here. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Like if you squat 500 and have a 36-inch vertical, you're not at a Division II school.
Yeah.
So I'll tend to get kids who are either very raw technically, very weak, or strong but pretty slow twitch.
Fair enough.
And so what I do with that is, as we get to that spring and we really limit the exercises that they perform, the slow twitch kids are going to keep the intensity very high. Because what I've seen is that the slow twitch kids tend to peak better when they're lifting heavier weight. And that's just, again, they will tend to have a higher power output when they can produce more force because the velocity side is not very high. The fast twitch kids, when we get into the spring, tend to do very little heavy work. They'll do heavier cleans, heavier snatches, that kind of thing. But on the static lifts, they tend to do a little less heavy work, because what I found is it tends to beat them up, and they feel slow and they feel tired. But they feel very good if we do, say, cluster type work, where we're keeping the intensity pretty high, but the density and or the weight is fairly low, so they can really just pop on stuff.
Yeah.
We've often just looked at where does peak power occur, using the gym aware or the push bands, and having work done at that peak power load, and that seemed to be pretty effective.
Okay.
For the kid who's pretty raw in technique,
Mm-hmm.
Often it will depend on how much technique work they need. We'll back off the lifting sometimes just to give them extra energy to take more throws.
Mm-hmm.
Because my view is, again, that the physical preparation side of it, especially in season, is to support whatever they need to perform.
Yeah.
We can look at the books we want, and we can say that this is what research backs up we need to perform.
Mm-hmm.
But if the kid's too tired from training to take the 50 throws he might need
Mm-hmm.
to make a technical change, then that's not going to help him.
Yeah.
So I think it's very much a balance of what does that person need to be able to succeed at this point,
Mm-hmm.
and that may change the next year. Again, if you have a kid who's really raw technically, he comes in this year, you might have to limit a little bit of his development work,
Mm-hmm.
so he can get this incredibly high volume of drills and throws in. The next year, if he's a little bit more proficient, okay, maybe we can push things a little bit more on the preparation side of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I think it's very important to be flexible and just read what as best you can.
Yeah.
What does somebody need?
Mm-hmm.
And try as best you can to fit that. And that's where, again, this kind of system of we're going to do everything all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and we just change the amount depending on what the person needs, has been very effective. And it's very easy to shift that. And that if somebody's needs change, okay, it's very easy to make that adjustment.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. There's a lot of good information there, right? And so a couple questions that kind of arose in my mind off of something you said. So when you're talking about this lactic response, right, you were talking about some of Bruce Schexnayder's circuits. So on something of his that I heard him say, he does like Olympic lifts, right, but he'll go into like higher, so like fives, for example, just to get a little bit of lactic response as well. What's your take on that?
I tend to stay away from that.
Okay.
Because I tend to look at what is or I try to find,
Mm-hmm.
What is the simplest way
Yeah.
to get the response that I want.
Uh-huh.
And what is what's the method with the least risk?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to be if I want a lactic response,
Yeah.
and I'm doing higher rep cleans, that's going to cause a little bit of fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
Not a big deal,
Yeah.
right? Not a big deal. But if I can get the same lactic response through a multi-throw circuit,
Yeah.
my view is I would rather stick to that.
Okay.
Because it's going to take any of that risk about doing a snatch under fatigue
Mm-hmm.
Out of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to let me have more. When I do lactic response, I tend to want more variety.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, again, I'm not trying to express power in that situation.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to cause a lactic response. So I tend to want more variety in the movement. The multi-throws allow for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to only use Olympics if we're doing either power
Mm-hmm.
or high force, still power because of the Olympics, but high force type work.
Yeah.
I tend to stay away from them if I'm trying to look for a lactic response.
Okay, that makes sense. And then moving forward, right, you're talking about this movement library, like the large movements that you do. In that movement library, what's your take on doing? So again, we're going kind of diving into more Olympic lift stuff, but on variations such as like split cleans or things like that. I've seen a lot of different catch variations. What's your take on that?
Yeah, early in the fall, we do a lot of different variations like that. We'll have them alternate legs in the jerks.
Okay.
We don't do any split cleans,
Uh-huh.
and that I don't have anything against that. We just haven't in the past.
Okay.
Nothing against that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do a lot of complexes.
Okay.
So a lot of things that, one, provide variation, two, improve retention of that movement pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So things like if we're going from the floor, a clean pull
Mm-hmm.
to a clean high pull to a power clean to a full clean.
Okay.
Stuff like that, where we can really enforce one piece, or we'll often do 3 position cleans and work our way down. So
Okay.
you'll do a hip clean,
Yeah.
a hang clean, and then a power clean.
Okay.
And just provide variation like that. But no, nothing against split cleans or split snatches, just have them put them in.
Yeah.
I think as long as you feel that it's safe for whatever athlete you're assigning it to, then I would say go for it.
Yeah.
My hesitation with that would be if a kid doesn't have a pretty good understanding of the basic movement, then I would hesitate to give him anything like that, which is going to add instability to it.
Yeah.
If I'm doing a split snatch and something is a little weird, it's hard to bail on that bar.
Yeah.
So if he's not pretty proficient in a snatch, that's just not something I would usually play with.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay. And then kind of the last question on that segment, right? You were talking about the difference with like the fast twitch and the slow twitch type kids. Do you do specific tests in that, or do you kind of just like, you can look at vertical jump and tell, or do you do anything more specific?
We just look at, we do the standard, if you've seen like the Max Drones quadrathon.
Yep, okay.
So that's the, standing long jump, standing triple jump, 30-meter sprint, and the overhead backwards toss.
Okay.
So we can use that. My experience has been, you can usually tell,
Yeah, it's pretty simple,
yeah, there's kids who are borderline.
Yeah.
But you watch somebody move, and you can see their basic numbers.
Yeah.
And you can get a pretty good picture just from your eyes.
Yeah.
The way I kind of use technology is I use technology to basically to double check what I observe. If typically I can watch a kid at this point and do a squat, and I can tell you, that was above 0.8 or below 0.8 or whatever our target is. But I don't like to rely on my eyes.
Yeah.
Because your eyes can trick you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll use technology to figure out whether or not I'm correct.
Okay.
But in most cases, if we have their strength numbers and if we have their vertical jump numbers, then we can figure out, where do you kind of fall on that on that scale.
Okay.
And often I'll address it not even so much from a, is he fast twitch or slow twitch, just relative strengths and weak points.
Yeah.
And then we adjust depending on do they respond. So if somebody has that 25-inch vertical and a 500-pound squat, we may run, depending on what else we've observed, we may run a cycle or a period where we focus on power work and a little bit more jumps, and we see what happens. Sometimes we'll get a kid, especially as a freshman, who has, say, a powerlifting background, and has never really done any type of plyometric or explosive work. So I'll tend to keep things pretty general again through that fall, because it also gives me a chance to see how do you respond to different types of training.
Okay.
And I try to take kind of as many small notes as I can about how people respond to cycles.
Yeah.
I'll check their practice throws during that time. And it's not a perfect method, but we can kind of see, okay, we're doing power type work. Your throws are doing pretty well. We did strength type work. Your throws sucked.
Yeah.
How does this work? And the way I don't think I mentioned it already, throughout the entire year, I'll tend to alternate accumulation and intensification cycles or periods. And what I mean by that is I'll say it's relative to the time of year. So an accumulation cycle in the fall is not going to look like an accumulation cycle in the spring.
Yeah.
An intensification cycle in the fall might be 5x3 at 85%. Because that's the heaviest they've gone in a couple months.
Yeah.
That might be something that looks like accumulation in the spring. Even though that's not really on the high end of volume for that load, compared to what we're doing in the spring, it might be.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives me that chance to test out how do they respond to these different types of loading.
Okay.
And get another glimpse, because really what I'm trying to do is create a profile of an adaptation profile, more or less. Is I want to see how they respond to different stimuli and figure out, is that something that we can manipulate later.
Okay.
Because we've had kids who, not just in track, but across other sports, who simply will not respond to high volume training. They get beat to pieces by it. And some of that is lifestyle.
Yeah.
If you're not taking care of your nutrition, you're not sleeping, you're going out drinking 3 nights a week, then you're just getting trashed.
Yeah.
And we do lifestyle and nutrition education. You're not going to get through to everybody, unfortunately. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So then I view it as long as we've done due diligence as best we can, both myself and the sport coach, to try to address what these other factors might be, then we need to figure out how can we adjust training to match what they respond to. So again, I've had some kids who the highest reps that they'll do is 5.
Mm-hmm.
And their accumulation period might be 5 sets of 5 at 70%,
Mm-hmm.
because they'll get destroyed if they do any more volume.
Yeah.
Their intensification or their cycle might be 3 sets of 1.
Mm-hmm.
Because they just cannot handle volume.
Yeah.
I've had other kids who you can throw anything you want at them and they'll recover just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's the better a profile, the better a picture of you get of how somebody adapts,
Mm-hmm.
then the better you can target the training towards their actual needs.
Yeah.
And how to actually progress them, as opposed to it says on paper that 5x10 is the best way to increase hypertrophy.
Yeah.
Because somebody published a paper on it.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't always work because everybody's an individual.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So what are some resources that have had a big impact on you, right? Whether that be a book, like a speaker you heard, or something like that?
Yeah, the first one, for a couple different reasons, was actually triphasic training.
Okay.
By Cal Dietz.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fantastic book, and the biggest part was it really opened my eyes. I read it soon after it came out,
Uh-huh.
just after I was getting into coaching.
Yeah.
And it really opened my eyes at that point to that there's more than squat, bench, and deadlift.
Yeah.
Because when I was just getting into it, I knew, the basic lifts. You
Uh-huh.
squat, bench, and deadlift, and you do the Olympics.
Yeah.
That's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You covered.
Yeah.
Jump every now and then, do a couple sprints, you're good.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it really, that was the first thing as I was starting to get into coaching and starting to kind of expand my education,
Mm-hmm.
outside of just the classroom, was that there's all sorts of methods out there.
Yeah.
And it's really, my view is the bigger, just like we want to have a large exercise library for athletes,
Mm-hmm.
as coaches, we want to have an extensive method and exercise library.
Yeah.
Because I want to be able to pull from different places to
Uh-huh.
try to match that situation.
Uh-huh.
Again, I'm trying to create a profile for each kid as best I can on how do they adapt.
Yeah.
Which, if something isn't working, then we want to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
And the more things that we know or are familiar with, then the more options we have to try to see if it will work for them.
Mm-hmm.
So triphasic was really the first one to show me, okay, we can do more than just increase strength.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, it also started to get me as I went to reread it a second time, year and a half later,
Mm-hmm.
started to get me to realize that we should approach any of these resources with a very critical eye.
Yeah.
Try to understand why this program works, as opposed to just taking the author at face value.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, and there's many people smarter than me. Cal Dietz is probably a much smarter man than me, so
Mm-hmm.
I may be way off.
Mm-hmm.
But I view it as, when we look at the stretch shortening cycle, we tend to see a larger activation of it through very rapid, fast movements,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's how quickly we can load and go.
Mm-hmm.
So doing these slow type eccentric movements, in my mind, might not really be causing an improvement to the stretch shortening cycle,
Mm-hmm.
as is proposed in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean it doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
because even if that is not what is causing a change, if we read through the entire program or the entire method as described, it's that sequence of eccentric, isometric, and then a concentric focus,
Mm-hmm.
which even if we take that outside of athletic development or the specific prescriptions,
Mm-hmm.
what that does is it makes a kid very proficient at controlling a squat,
Mm-hmm.
very proficient at holding tension in the bottom of a squat,
Yeah.
and learning how to actually apply intent to stand up out of a squat.
Yeah.
Those three, they're pretty critical as far as the squat and bench and any of these triphasic lifts.
Mm-hmm.
So even if these adaptations aren't occurring exactly the way that they're proposed,
Mm-hmm.
it can still be incredibly effective because it's improving their ability to perform these lifts.
Mm-hmm.
Combine that with the very high relative volume of jumps and plyometrics, accelerated jumps, French contrast, all that kind of stuff that's prescribed.
Mm-hmm.
That's an incredibly solid recipe. Whether or not the science checks out, that's an incredibly solid recipe to improve somebody as an athlete.
Yeah.
So with that, when I went back and reread it, it really got me thinking about what can we take from these different types of methods, and how can we apply that to whatever program or whatever situation we have.
Mm-hmm.
And to really approach, again, everything with a critical eye and see, does this actually cause the change that is being proposed? Might this be different? Because the way I approach any type of education is you should always question it.
Yeah.
Not just to try to, we're not trying to pick apart and find things wrong, but it allows you to evaluate and to think about, why is this effective? Because this author has obviously been effective. So what about this at its core is effective and more or less foolproof? Like, why does this work? I'll always go back to Jim Wendler's 5-3-1, incredibly basic program. Why is it effective for so many people, including in an athletic context where it's applied?
Yeah.
Because we can look at that and say, this is very simple, this doesn't fit anything we read in books, this is stupid, you just do the same program over and over. Why do so many kids get better on this stuff?
Yeah.
Well, it sets you up to a point where you have to push.
Yeah.
If you're doing those max sets, and you're truly performing it to the letter of the book, you're doing a maximal set that is going to cause near or complete motor unit recruitment.
Yeah.
Right? So even if this is imperfect in the scientific sense, what's very effective about it is you're causing full motor unit recruitment, which is going to increase strength unless somebody's very advanced. So you don't need to do necessarily these very complex methods if you can get the results from something simpler.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you should have that a very extensive method library, but that doesn't mean you have to use them all. I think the next book would be, I don't know if many people have read this book, but The American Football Manual, I think is what it's called, by, I believe it was Ryan Williams and Buddy Morris.
Yeah.
I don't think many people have read it, but it has an incredible description of that high-low system and how to order training components according to nervous system effect. There's a couple of tables or graphs in there that show the relative effect of all these various methods. So sprints, explosive jumps, weightlifting above 80%, weightlifting below 80%, and lays it out in a very concise manner. And that was something that I read early on as I was coaching, and kind of solidified my use of rough high-low system. I think it orders it in a very fantastic way, as well as provides some very good examples on energy system development and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's a really underrated book that I don't think many people have read. Another one would be Applied Sprint Training by James Smith.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think a lot of people have that one, and it's just a very good explanation, overview of how to do sprint training in a non-track setting.
Yeah.
How do we fit this into a team sport development? And I use a lot of that with soccer and even basketball. How can we improve sprint performance, and use a lot of the drills and the kind of how he lays out those programs. Again, it fits in that same high-low system, so it works pretty well with what I'm already doing. Another big one would be the Special Strength Training Manual by Kashansky. Not so much on the specific. I don't necessarily get daily use out of this type of thing, but as far as influence, it opened my eyes to that concept of the dynamic correspondence.
Yeah.
And what similarities does an exercise have to the athletic performance? And how can we target these exercises, especially as we get, going back to that the throwers. As we get into spring, how can we try to make sure that these exercises target and have the largest transfer? Dynamic correspondence isn't the same as transfer, but how can we try to fit those principles to make sure that we are trying to cause transfer?
Yeah.
And that involves everything from looking at the type of contraction. If we're doing that classic example is a downhill skier. They're not doing a whole lot of concentric activity. They're doing a lot of isometric and eccentric because they're absorbing those forces.
Exactly. Yeah.
We don't necessarily have that in most, team sporting events. But even in things like, say, volleyball middle blockers, or back line where they're getting ready for the ball to come across. Often they're down in a ready position and move from there.
Yeah.
They're not standing up tall and loading and going.
Yeah.
So little things like that kind of open my eyes to, we can target these type of adaptations a little bit better than just applying, I want to jump high, here's a box jump, here's a test jump, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And how do we start to sequence these kind of things?
Mm-hmm.
I think the last one that had a big impact was obviously because I was a thrower, still a thrower, and coach throwers,
Mm-hmm.
is the Transfer of Training series by Bondarchuk.
Okay.
And that's, again, what that was as far as influence goes, got me thinking about how does an exercise transfer to performance?
Mm-hmm.
Not just with throwers, but with athletes in general.
Yeah.
Can't always, but can we identify exercises that we can say with relative certainty will improve performance in their sport?
Mm-hmm.
It gets difficult in team sports because there's so many variables.
Yeah.
The other team, your teammates, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we can still say we've identified based on past training cycles every time this person does depth jumps.
Mm-hmm.
We see an increase in their vertical jump,
Mm-hmm.
or their standing triple. So okay, if this is a time of year where we feel this is important, we can make sure to put this exercise in and can say with relative certainty that they will improve.
Mm-hmm.
We use it a lot with throwers, where during the fall, part of the exercises I rotate
Mm-hmm.
are special strength exercises.
Okay.
And we'll start to try to figure out where do we see or where do we hopefully see some type of positive change on performance in a given event.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can start to say, with reasonable certainty, all right, I have this hammer thrower who, through the indoor season, for a month we did plate winds,
Mm-hmm.
and his weight toss was great during that month. So it takes time, and that's one of the downsides of that kind of a system,
Yeah.
is it takes time to determine what truly works for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But we can then try that out again in spring.
Yeah.
We know during the indoor season, his special strength exercise that we performed 3 or 4 times a week
Mm-hmm.
was plate winds.
Okay.
We're going to do that again this month in the outdoor season, and we're going to see if that works. If
Mm-hmm.
it does, okay, we know relatively certain that we can apply this at the end of the year, and it should help him peak,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that was, again, all of these books, for the most part, were things that I read fairly early on, and it wasn't necessarily the specific information. It was more of the concepts of we can apply training to what we actually need,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to just getting strong.
Yeah.
And sometimes what somebody needs is to just get strong.
Yeah.
Not always. And that's where, that art of coaching comes in, is how
Mm-hmm.
can you evaluate somebody and figure out whether it's technology or whether it's, your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
How do you determine what their needs are and what
Mm-hmm.
needs to come first?
Yeah.
Again, going back to that fast twitch and slow twitch, you got a crazy fast twitch kid, sure, the research says that they need a double body weight squat before power is going to, really be diminishing returns. We should focus on squat strength.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have a basketball player with a 36-inch standing vert who only squats 1.5 times his body weight,
Mm-hmm.
is he really going to get that much better at vertical jumping by squatting multiple times a week to increase that squat strength?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
what I'll go to with that is it gets overplayed a bit, but think of, LeBron James. Is LeBron James going to be a better athlete if he squatted double body weight to parallel?
Yeah. No, that's funny.
I can't really say that he would.
Yeah.
Because that's not how he moves.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that's very important, is we need to be able to look at how does an athlete move
Mm-hmm.
naturally, and how do we take advantage of that?
Yeah.
And going back to at this level, I tend not to get the freaks.
Mm-hmm.
So what we often have to do is make the best of the athletes that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of that is looking at how does somebody move, how can we improve their strengths while mitigating their weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
There's the quote, make your weaknesses your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a genetic reality, though.
Yeah.
Your weaknesses are often weaknesses. If you've got real short levers,
Yeah.
you've got real short levers.
It's yeah.
And then it's what can we do to take advantage of that? Or how can we maximize whatever strength you do have while mitigating that weakness?
Yeah.
Because your strength, by the time you get to college, your strength is usually your strength.
Exactly. That's why you got there
It's very
sometimes.
hard. Yeah, it's very hard to change at that point, just because
Mhm.
most of these kids, you have anywhere from 4 to 10 years of experience in your sport in most cases.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you can't improve by very large amounts,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't become a fundamentally different athlete.
Yeah.
So we can't really look at a kid who is incredibly, reactive, but very weak, and say we're going to make him a strong squatter.
Yeah.
That doesn't. That's not how he got here. Should he get stronger in most cases? Yeah, but that's not necessarily going to be a primary concern. It's going to be part of his development. But it's not like this is a cut and dry make or break. He must get stronger or else he will never make it.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. That's a really good point, right? Because again, if we're not optimizing those strengths and we're working on, like you said, if LeBron James, we're working on making him a double body weight, deep squatter, that might take away from the game that he is currently playing. You know what I mean? Like we're
absolutely
working against what we should be doing. So no, that's a good point. And then kind of moving into this last section here, just a few rapid fire questions, right? So first one, so what are some quotes that you live by?
There's two that kind of go together. One is, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. I have no idea who actually came up with that. I think it's usually attributed to Einstein, but pretty sure that's not right. The other one that goes with that is, everything should be as simple as it can be, but not simpler. And really what those just mean is you should do the basics unless it's absolutely necessary to do something else.
Yeah.
As far as if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it enough, I think that's more on the coaching side of it, in interactions with other coaches and athletes, sport coaches and athletes.
Yeah.
Because nobody's impressed if you can explain every step of protein synthesis.
Yeah.
The athlete doesn't care.
Yeah.
You just need to be able to convey in an efficient way that you should take your post-workout protein.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have the budget to give it to you, but you should go. And if you have to be able to understand, or you have to be able to explain the reason for why, unless somebody's asking, it's often counterproductive to explain the exact why.
Yeah.
Again, that's just how efficient can you be with your information. Nobody wants to listen to something that takes 2 minutes to explain when you could have said it in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
You got the point across.
Exactly.
I always tell my kids that if you want to know why, absolutely come ask me. I'll be more than happy to explain, everything that we do. I want you to ask questions, but I'm not going to spend 5 minutes explaining exactly how protein synthesis works, and that's why you should have post-workout protein.
Yeah, exactly.
At that point, we're just wasting time. We're not communicating effectively. So everything should be as simple as it can be, but not simpler. Is more on the programming side of things. That if whatever our adaptation that we're targeting is, we should use the simplest possible method to cause that adaptation. If that doesn't work, then we use a more complex one.
Yeah.
If that doesn't work, we use a more complex one. If I have a kid, going back to that person who is incredibly reactive, but is kind of weak.
Yeah.
Okay, our basic is we're going to teach you how to move. We're going to start doing basic front squats, hang cleans, that kind of deal in most cases, and we're going to start to get stronger. If let's say he's a high jumper, so he starts to get stronger, we don't see any improvement in relevant physical abilities. Okay, then we switch something up.
Yeah.
Then we'll use a little bit more. We'll do some more jump complexes. So we'll do more depending on where we are in the year. Maybe we'll increase the volume of depth jumps and decrease the strength lifts. Maybe we'll do French contrast, type stuff with any of the strength lifts.
Yeah.
We use whatever method will get us to the adaptation that we want. But if he can improve doing 5x5 front squats, and he sees his high jump go up and his his RSI improves and all that stuff, then we're going to front squat 5x5.
Exactly.
And I have no reason to do this fancy stuff if he will improve on the basics.
No, I agree. That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So this next question here. So what's the best advice you've ever been given, whether it's in strength and conditioning or just in life?
So as far as strength conditioning side of it is, it was to don't look at what the pros do, look at what your kids need and give it to them.
Yeah.
And that's just, again, that we'll use LeBron James again.
Yeah.
We go watch a LeBron James workout video. He's going to do, half depth squats, in a really awkward manner.
Yeah. No,
He's gonna,
you're not wrong.
yeah, dumbbell bench. He's going to do, some real basic stuff. He's going to do a lot of cables, a lot of functional work.
Mm-hmm.
And, cool. Good for him.
Yeah.
He's LeBron James.
Exactly.
He can do that stuff.
Yeah.
He was 16 years old, looked like a grown man.
Exactly.
So he can do that stuff. If you're here, you're not LeBron James.
Uh-huh.
Hopefully you realize that at this point. But if you're here, you're not LeBron James.
Yeah.
So we need to do training that will actually give the kids what they need, as opposed to what they want. Because often what they want is they see the pros. Even sport coaches will see the pros do stuff and be like, well, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
I don't see them performing cleans and pulled up squats. Why are we doing that?
Yeah.
And it's, we're doing this because this is the adaptation we're looking for.
Exactly.
This is how we need a physical base, and this is where the research tends to support that we can improve it the best.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where we're going to start, and then we'll change as we need. But we're going to try to give them what they need, not what the pros do.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's good. Okay. And then conversely, right? What's the worst advice you've ever been given?
Yes, I don't know if I've ever been given terrible advice. I think I've been fortunate on that end.
Okay.
That I can't think of anything that turned out very poorly or was very poor advice.
Okay.
One of the things I got told when I got into the profession was be prepared to move a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's just part of the game.
Yeah.
Be prepared to move. And when I heard that, my take was, well, if I don't make stuff the first couple times, I'm going to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I have 2 young daughters and a wife, and I'm not going to move them all across the country.
Yeah.
Chasing jobs that nobody cares about.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like we do this stuff because we love it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody sees it as you're the man because you do strength conditioning coaching.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like I'm not chasing it across the country. No job is worth a divorce because you don't spend any time at home.
Yeah.
And I feel very strongly about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I've ever been given any worse, bad advice. I think often people will, especially in this profession, seem to just take things as a reality.
Okay.
You're as a kid, you're gonna have to do 2 or 3 internships for free. You're gonna have to move all the way across the country. And my take is just know what your principles are,
mm-hmm.
and be comfortable as best you can sticking to those, even if it means you have to switch where you are in the field,
mm-hmm.
or find something else.
Yeah.
In the end, no one's going to care whether you were a strength coach in high school, at college, private sector, whether you're doing something else completely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when we die, nobody cares.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's find out what your principles are, and make sure it sets you up and sets your family up.
Mm-hmm.
And if you love strength coaching, find a way to do that, but don't let it get in the way of what's actually important.
I think that's a super important point, and that's one of the things that, I'm still early in my career as well, and that's one of the most important points that I've seen is people chase things, and then at the end of it all, it's just you're still unhappy. You know what I mean? So that's a really important point. Okay, so moving to this kind of last point here, right? So what projects are you currently working on, and how can people kind of reach out to you and follow your journey?
Yeah, the big one that we're working on right now is starting to try to use velocity to measure daily readiness.
Okay.
And I don't velocity in the lifts, just because we don't have enough units to use with an entire team.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll use it with the throwers, and I'll use it with indicator athletes.
Yeah.
Meaning the people who tend to be more proficient, or people who I feel give a good representation of the team.
Mm-hmm.
We'll often use speed or velocity-based work while we're lifting.
Mm-hmm.
But using velocity to determine the daily readiness is actually, I should say, power instead of velocity. Using the gym aware to get a power reading on vertical jumps.
Okay.
And, adjusting based on how that progresses.
Mm-hmm.
So my theory is that we're going to see using that same rough. We'll use the throwers as an example because it's kind of a clean illustration. Using that same high, medium, low split through the week. My theory is that we're going to test each day we're going to see our highest number on day 1. We're going to go down a little bit on day 2 because we just did a bunch of leg work.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go up a little bit on day 3. We should be back to within, say, a couple percentage points of our day 1 number by the time Thursday rolls around.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing, it'll go down, it'll be back up. We have Sunday off. By the time they come in on Monday, it should be the same or slightly increased from what it was the previous Monday.
Mm-hmm.
That's my theory.
Okay.
We're going to see how that turns out. So during the fall is just going to be collection. I'm not going to act on it at all.
Okay.
We're just going to collect. And we're just going to see how that goes.
Yeah.
I've got about 12 kids that I'll be doing that with.
Okay.
I just get kind of an idea of, does that theory play out? Is that completely wrong?
Mm-hmm.
If we see a decrease, the one thing I know is that we should not be seeing a decrease from week to week.
Yeah.
Because ideally, we're going to be performing enough work to cause an adaptation, not enough work to beat somebody down.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, again, each week we're going to see either the same or a slight uptick in power output on those vertical jumps.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a deload week or a restoration period, we should see that super compensate, and we should see a significantly high power output.
Mm-hmm.
I'm playing with the power output as opposed to the vertical jump height, simply because I think that'll be a more precise reading, and it'll account for fluctuations in body weight.
Okay.
Say we have again, going to throwers because it's a clean example. We've got a kid who is trying to gain weight. He comes in pretty small. He's trying to put weight on to get stronger.
Mm-hmm.
If he gets stronger, if he adds 15 pounds, say over fall, and his vertical jump stays the same,
yeah,
his power is going to have gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Vertical jump reading says we're not improving. His power output's going to have gone through the roof if he put 15 pounds on and he's still jumping the same height.
Yeah.
I think it will reflect, again, what is our power output as opposed to how high are we getting off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the sport, will depend on how important that actual vertical is.
Yeah.
Going to softball will be the same thing as throwing.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to depend more on how much can you put out in most cases
mm-hmm.
than how high you jump. Because we don't do a whole lot of vertical jumping because it's not really part of the game. So with them, it's just it's an indicator of general power output, and it should reflect or it should account for any changes in body weight that we might see.
Okay.
So that's for the project that we're working on through this fall.
Okay. So how can people kind of reach out to you and follow your journey here a little bit?
Yeah, anybody can feel free to contact me via email
if
they want to. And that's just damien.fisher@wwu.edu.
Mm-hmm.
We can go on the Western Athletics site and you can find that. Or I have an Instagram. It's just Damien Fisher 21. I'm very lazy about posting anything related to work on there.
Yeah.
Every now and mostly just pictures of my kids and me throwing.
Okay.
But have that as well. Again, I'd say if they have any questions, if they want to chat or reach out anything about strength and conditioning, just feel free to send me an email.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Damien, thanks again for your time. I think there's a lot of really, really good takeaways from here and a lot of things for people.
Thanks for helping me.
Oh, no problem. A lot of people can look up some of these things and a lot of good book titles and resources. So this is one of those that's just going to keep on giving. So, again, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to connecting again in the future.
Absolutely. Take care, man. Keep doing your thing.
All right, man. Talk to you soon. As always, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your continued support. Please like, comment, share on your social media platform of choice, and please go ahead and give me a review on iTunes, okay? It really helps. It really helps me with my direction of where I'm going with this thing, and it really helps give me some good feedback. So please, I'm asking you, just go ahead and give me a review. It takes less than 5 minutes. So if this thing does anything for you, just go ahead, and this is how you can kind of pay me back. Looking forward to another exciting guest next week. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, or people you want to hear from, reach out to me, send me an email. Other than that, I will see you next week. But until then, this is the Gamut of Performance Podcast.